Brückner.
Mr. Brückner, did you kill Madeleine McCann?
He's out there right now, living somewhere in northern Germany. Ankle tag on, 2 phones, 8 undercover officers watching him around the clock. And he is completely legally free. Scotland Yard wants to change that. And this week they made their most aggressive move yet to bring Christian Brückner to trial. But here's what's standing in the way. And trust me, when you hear what the Met actually has on this man, you'll understand exactly why they are not letting this go. The big play. According to a bombshell report in the Telegraph this week, a senior officer from the Metropolitan Police is personally spearheading an effort to bring Christian Brückner to the UK to stand trial for the abduction and murder of Madeleine McCann. At the Old Bailey, no less. That's the same court where some of the most serious criminal cases in British legal history have been heard. Detectives from Operation Grange, the Met's inquiry that has by this point cost British taxpayers over £13 million, believe they are close to having enough evidence for the Crown Prosecution Service to authorise formal charges. A Scotland Yard insider told the Telegraph, "Next year marks 2 decades since Madeleine McCann's disappearance. If the evidence is robust enough to facilitate the extradition of the primary suspect and bring him to trial here, that is our objective." 2 decades. The 20th anniversary of May 3, 2007 is less than a year away, and that deadline is very clearly driving the urgency here. But here's the thing. There is a wall standing between this ambition and reality, and it might be the most impenetrable legal wall in Europe. The Brexit problem nobody wants to talk about. Let's get into the legal situation because this is where things get genuinely complicated, and frankly, a little infuriating depending on which side you're on. Article 16 of the German Basic Law, the German Constitution, states in plain terms that no German citizen may be extradited to a foreign country. That's it. No exceptions for the severity of the crime. No exceptions for public pressure. It's not a policy that can be reversed by a change of government or a diplomatic favour. It is constitutional law. Now, before Brexit, this wasn't the problem it is today. Under the European arrest warrant, extraditions between EU member states were essentially streamlined, fast-tracked, and near-automatic. Germany carved out one exception to its constitutional rule: EU member states. The UK used to be one of them. It isn't anymore. Since Brexit, Germany, along with 9 other EU countries, has exercised a specific provision in the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, allowing them to impose a nationality bar on extraditing their own citizens to Britain. George Hepburn Scott, a specialist extradition barrister, put it bluntly this week. The likelihood of Brückner being surrendered to the UK is practically zero. A German government spokesman confirmed to the Express this week that, yes, Brexit has in effect sealed that door shut. Asked directly whether Brexit has blocked Brückner's extradition, the spokesman said, yes, that is the case. Let that sink in for a moment. Brexit, a decision made in 2016 and finalised in 2020, may be one of the reasons why the prime suspect in the disappearance of a British child never faces a British court. What happens if Germany says no? So what does the Met actually do if Germany refuses, which constitutionally they almost certainly will? The answer is that the game shifts. According to the Telegraph, the Metropolitan Police has made it clear it is determined to see Brückner face charges somewhere, and if not the UK, then Germany itself, or Portugal, where Madeleine vanished on the night of May 3, 2007. The Portuguese option is actually more interesting than it sounds. Portugal still has an active investigation. Brückner was formally designated an arguido, a formal suspect, by Portuguese authorities back in 2022. And crucially, Portugal's legal system doesn't have the same constitutional barriers that Germany does. There is also one other key detail that legal experts have flagged. If Brückner ever leaves Germany, even to travel abroad for a holiday, the UK could theoretically seek his arrest through a third country. As long as he stays on German soil, he's protected. The moment he steps off it, the picture changes entirely. His lawyers know this, which is why one of his lawyers told Mail Online this week, with an almost jaw-dropping degree of confidence, "We have good lawyers. I have good lawyers," Brückner himself reportedly said. A source close to the legal team added they were confident the extradition would never happen. The evidence. What does the Met actually have? This is the question that's hung over this case for years. Prosecutors have described Brückner as not just their prime suspect, but their only suspect. Lead German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters has said on record there is no one else. And yet, no charges. For nearly 5 years, since his name went public in 2020, the investigators have been building a case and have not yet felt confident enough to bring it to court. So what are they working with? The most discussed piece of evidence is cell tower data placing Brückner's phone in the Praia de Luz area on the evening of May 3rd, 2007, the night Madeleine disappeared. He had not been living in the village at the time, so the question of why his phone was pinging from that location matters. When Brückner spoke to police voluntarily in 2013, he reportedly gave a detailed account of his whereabouts throughout May 2007. An account investigators believe contradicts what the cell data shows. Then there's the digital trail. In a 2016 search of his property, investigators found a buried hard drive containing, among other disturbing material, Skype chat logs in which Brückner allegedly wrote that he wanted to capture something small and use it for days. At the same search, police found hundreds of child sexual abuse images. There were also letters and writings reportedly describing fantasies about abducting young children. In 2020, investigators discovered discarded children's clothing and photographs of children at a factory Brückner had used. Divers combed through an isolated reservoir in the Algarve, a site he was known to frequent. Searches at Portugal's Arade Dam have also taken place, with investigators finding buried children's items. There was also a cellmate, a man named Lourenço C., who testified that Brückner confessed to him that he had taken a child while attempting to burgle a wealthy area of Portugal. That is a significant amount of circumstantial evidence. It paints a deeply disturbing picture of who this man is. But circumstantial evidence is not the same as a case that wins in court. And German prosecutors have admitted that, in their assessment, it is still not robust enough to secure a conviction beyond reasonable doubt. The Met, it seems, believes otherwise, or at least believes it's getting there. The German retrial, the parallel battle. Here's where another critical thread runs alongside the UK push, and it's one that's been developing since February. Brückner was acquitted in October 2024 at the Braunschweig court of 5 separate sex offences committed in Portugal, crimes entirely unrelated to the McCann case. The prosecution needed a guilty verdict not only to keep him behind bars, but as leverage in the broader McCann investigation. The judge, Uta Engemann, found insufficient evidence. Prosecutors were stunned. They immediately appealed. And in February of this year, Germany's Federal Prosecutor General, the country's most senior public prosecutor, submitted a 44-page report to the BGH, the Federal Court of Justice in Karlsruhe, describing the original judgment as chaotic and calling for the acquittal to be immediately quashed. The report picked apart Judge Engemann's handling of the case, particularly her treatment of key witness testimony, including that of Hazel Bairn, an Irish holiday rep who alleged she was raped in the Algarve in 2004 and testified at trial. The federal prosecutor argued the judge was shambolic in repeatedly casting doubt on the credibility of crucial witnesses. Hazel Byrne herself has since confirmed, through sources close to her, that she is fully prepared to return to court if a retrial is ordered. A panel of BGH judges is now reviewing the evidence. They can either order a full retrial, most likely at a higher court in Leipzig, or issue their own judgment based on the existing 8 months of trial record. Either way, a decision is expected. If a retrial is ordered and Brückner is convicted, that changes the landscape significantly. A new conviction could provide renewed grounds for preventative detention, keeping him behind bars while a McCann investigation continues. Time, in this case, is everything. Where is Brückner now? And in all of this legal maneuvering, the question that keeps coming up is a strangely basic one. Where actually is Christian Brückner right now? After his release from Sender prison in September 2025, he was initially living in Woodland in northern Germany, camping in a tent surrounded by snow, supplied by a small team of helpers who kept him fed and hidden from the public. Local communities erupted in protest when his presence became known. In one town, parents spoke of children in school playgrounds frightened because they'd heard from their parents that the man was living nearby. In February, he was moved, by the local authority, to a new town over 3 hours away, after protests made his situation untenable. In March, an attempt to move him into a private flat in Braunschweig also reportedly fell through. Since then, according to The Week, he has dropped off the radar. He has declined a request from the UK Metropolitan Police to be interviewed. When ITV News reporters approached him in November 2025 and asked whether it was true that he had killed Madeleine, he shouted at the crew and knocked over a reporter's microphone without a word of answer. He wears his ankle tag. He carries his police-issued phone. And somewhere in Germany, under round-the-clock surveillance, the man who prosecutors say is the only suspect in the murder of a 3-year-old British girl continues to live as a free man. The big picture. Let's zoom out for a second because the stakes here go beyond one case. The McCann investigation has become, whether it means to or not, a kind of stress test for post-Brexit justice in Europe. The European arrest warrant was a tool that allowed British law enforcement to work seamlessly with EU counterparts. Its loss has real consequences for real cases. Brückner's situation is perhaps the most visible example, but it won't be the last. What the Met's push this week signals, regardless of whether it ultimately succeeds, is that the UK is not letting this go. The 20th anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance is less than a year away. There are families, investigators, legal teams, and an entire country watching what happens next. And Brückner? He reportedly told those who would listen, "I have good lawyers." He may well be right about that, but the BGH is reviewing his acquittal. The Met is building a murder case. Portuguese investigators still have him as a formal suspect. Operation Grange has spent £13 million and counting. He may be free, but he is far from forgotten. The next major development will likely come from Karlsruhe, from the BGH panel reviewing that 44-page prosecutorial assault on his acquittal. If they order a retrial, it resets the clock. If they don't, Brückner walks away from those rape charges permanently, and the road to any kind of accountability gets significantly longer. And somewhere in Germany, an ankle tag blinks. 8 officers in 6-hour shifts watch, and the world waits. If you want to stay on top of every development as it happens, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this story is not over, not by a long shot.